Hey there hunters, welcome back to the Gunners Guild. Today in Remnant 2, we're going to be taking a look at the Invader archetype. And while I typically do one build showcase per video, today we're going to do two because they're kind of similar. The first is the melee build Redux with Invader, because I did say I was going to go back and revisit it once Invader got fixed. And the second one is going to be a ranged build, but we're still utilizing Invader in pretty much the same way. There's going to be a lot of similarities between the two, so I just figured we'd just lump them together. But with that out of the way, let's talk about Invader. So the first build that we're going to be showcasing is the melee version, giving an inch. The build is going to largely function the same as the Alchemist Challenger variant, but we're using Invader instead because it does bring some nice utility to the field. Alchemist Frenzy Dust is great and it grants 20% increased attack speed, which is huge, and it's probably more DPS, so sadly, the Invader is going to be a slight loss by comparison, but I think the extra tools in the Invader's kit makes the DPS loss pretty bearable. So what does Invader bring to the table? Well, the damage perk is actually really nice since it's a 35% damage bonus for melee and ranged, and because it's on sprint and dodge, this basically has 100% uptime, because I mean really, when are you not sprinting or dodging? The utility perk also just lets us extend that by reducing the stamina cost of our evade. And lastly, the relic perk, which lets us drop a decoy after we use a relic, is alright. I mean, it's definitely got some uses, but it's not the best. But the main feature of why we're actually using Invader is the prime perk, which lets any of your Invader skills drop a decoy on use, as well as the skills themselves, because Invader skills are just so damn good. You can use any skill, to be honest. Void Cloak is great for learning boss fights and taking hits accidentally. It's going to save your life, and especially on Apocalypse, you can, rather than get one shot, you could take 2 or 3 hits. Reboot is literally a second life every minute. It's probably the best revive in the game. And both of these skills are great for more casual play. Then we have Wormhole, my favorite skill in the entire game. The blink that provides your next hit with 300% more damage. It's crazy good. Also, because it works for both melee and ranged hits. Do note that this is not a 3 times damage multiplier, it is a 300% damage increase, which is added to your generic damage pool. It is different, maths. Still good, but it's not triple damage good. Now when you pair Wormhole with the Prime perk, it lets us leave a copy behind every single time we use Wormhole that will draw aggro for 3 seconds, and that is the hook for Invader in my eye. The amount of times Wormhole has saved my ass is incalculable. Not only is it a get out of jail free card with just being able to move that far really fast, it gives you a very generous amount of iframes as well, but also the decoy left behind ensures that whatever was targeting you isn't, at least for a little bit. Gives you a lot of breathing room. And yeah, I mean, it works on bosses too. They will go for the decoy for like 3 seconds, it's crazy. Now, outside the change to Invader, the melee build functionally is exactly the same. It still uses World's Edge for bosses that you have to range, and Stonebreaker for those that can melee. Ranged weapons don't matter, and no, we're not using that boar to get a second hitbox on melee hits, we're just trying to avoid bugs where possible. However, an interesting thing to note about Wormhole too, now that I think about it, is when you use Wormhole in something like Stonebreaker that casts a projectile with the swing, if you're on top of the enemy and you hit with both the swing and the projectile at the same time, you can get the Wormhole bonus for both hits. Probably not intended, but also there's no real way to avoid it. But you can do some pretty nasty hits with that when the stars align, and you can get crit on both the hits and then start hitting for like 7 and 9k when Juggernaut's active. It's not something you can do constantly, but it is pretty fun when it lands. So yeah, I mean, Invader's got some big swings. And again, the rest of the build is pretty much all the same as the previous melee version. We're still running light armor for better evades, though you can easily build like a tankier version with the extra weight that Challenger lets you have, and then just run bulkier armor. If you want to go that route, then for your traits, I highly recommend getting Fortify and Bark Skin over some of the lesser used traits such as Potency or Glutton, just to get some added bulk. And while I don't use any HP, you can definitely build it to be tankier than I usually run it at. On Apocalypse, you're still going to get like 3 tapped, but I mean, being able to take 2 hits on Apocalypse is pretty generous in my opinion. So best use those relics to sustain yourself if you're going to do the bulky route. And then speaking of the relics, I've been playing around with a few. Obviously the choice is yours, everyone's got their own favorite relics. But for a no-hit melee, I like to use the Divergent Heart now to use the reduced skill cooldowns, because that's really nice when you have some downtime. If you want to build a tankier build, then Crystal Heart also works really well to sustain your HP and provide some little extra damage reduction. And of course, if you're not using the Bisected Ring for like a tankier setup, then the Quilted Heart is an amazing option. Infinite stamina and good life regen for 20 seconds. Definitely recommend that one. Trinkets are, again, pretty much the same. You can see here, feel free to remove the bisected ring and go with the Kari Warband or something similar if you don't want to manage the 25% increased damage taken with bisected ring, because, I mean, if you're going to make a tanky build, you have to get rid of that 100%. And then the traits are also the same, unless you're just going to, move to the tankier version, which you can see here as well. Anyway, melee with Invader. It is still amazing. Melee is so damn good in this game. Invader Challenger is probably weaker than running Alchemist Challenger just because of the 20% attack speed, but Invader is way more fun in general, and it does provide us a lot of utility with the decoy taunts and then the movement option to either close gaps or get out of situations. Highly recommend giving an inch. Moving on to the second Invader build. This one is ranged focused, and it's going to be utilizing one of my favorite guns in Remnant 1, the Spore Bloom. I always love Spore Bloom. It's a big single shot shotgun and has the best status mod with slow, and a low costing slow at that. Be careful with the mod though, it still does friendly fire damage and you can kill yourself pretty quickly on Apocalypse, and there's no way in hell I'm investing into kinship just for this. So the reason why I want to use Spore Bloom should appear obvious by now, but it's literally just to make use of Wormhole's 300% damage mod and getting one single big ass hit on Spore Bloom. And yeah, I mean, you could definitely get some big hits here, but I wouldn't count on them all that often because you can't just spam Wormhole. Spore Bloom is the highest single shot weapon in the game, so it just makes sense to pair it with Invader here. Plus it's root theme, so come on, it just works hand in hand. The second weapon I'm using is the SMG with Twisted Wounds to apply our bleed when it's more convenient than throwing a grenade. And the mod typically I use is just Song of Earfur to apply just that large slow and damage some flyers. I seldom use it, but it definitely is one of the more useful mods out there. So to pair it with Invader, because obviously we're going to be maining Invader here, the optimal route would actually be to use Hunter as the prime perk and then just go Invader for just Wormhole if you wanted to do that, because Hunter provides us with huge single shot damage potential. But that's not what I'm doing here. This build, we're going to actually make use of Invader as the prime because I just love decoys, and Gunslinger we're going to be using as our secondary. Main reason for this is that Gunslinger's second damage perk lets us reload 20% faster with Spore Bloom, and Spore Bloom's downtime between each shot is really what kills its overall DPS, so you need to stack a lot of reload speed where possible. Unfortunately, there's no relic for reload speed. And also, the Bullet Storm that Gunslinger provides gives us 50% increased reload speed, but also makes our Spore Bloom fully automatic, which is nice, so you just hold down the button and shoot and reload. Fire rate isn't all that helpful with Spore Bloom initially, so you can see the increased fire rate from the damage perk and Bulletstorm as useless, but when we pair it with the Bandit Mutator on the Spore Bloom, the subsequent hits that activate Bandit will fire faster as long as you're holding down that fire button, so the fire rate is not entirely a dead stat, just kind of seldom used, so it's less helpful than things like reload speed or just generic damage increases. Anyway, you can see here the essence of the Invader Spore Bloom build. We're using Wormhole and Spore Bloom and trying to min-max just this little interaction. The armor for this setup is my standard 25 and under weight because getting hit on Apocalypse is bad. The relic, of course, again is something that is just a personal choice. I'm liking Divergent Heart for the skill cooldowns. Since this build is typically going to get one hit KO on Apocalypse, there's just not many other options that could be effective enough if that's the case. I'm using the crit and crit damage fragments on my relic, and the third one here can be a weak spot damage fragment, but I'm using spread reduction to make the Spore Bloom reticle basically non-existent. You can adapt this again like the melee version to be a more tanky setup. You can definitely make sure to take a hit or two, but again, that's not what I'm going for because I like to do the no hit stuff. The trinkets, shocker, are more bleed and crit stacking because crit stacking is the best way to get damage here in Remnant 2. Bleed is also pretty easy to upkeep on this setup, so Abrasive Amulet is basically best in slot. The rings are all your favorites: Akari Warband, Xania's Malice, Probability Cord, and then the last one I'm using is the Targeting Jewel to get some extra range on my Spore Bloom. You can run something else that suits your needs like Ring of Flawed Beauty, but with a 10 meter range, Spore Bloom really needs some help in that department. The traits are also going to be fairly straightforward. We do end up taking Long Shot for more Spore Bloom range though, getting it to the 20 meter range, which feels pretty nice to use. Other obvious traits are the Swiftness and Footwork, because that's basically mandatory, but we're also going for Handling to reduce our spread on Spore Bloom and the SMG. It gets kind of weird when you get the reticle this small, because it's really small and hard to see, and I miss a lot of shots because I honestly just can't quite see where the reticle is on enemies sometimes, but it's definitely worth it to get those really big hits. Now, Spore Bloom may not be the most DPS build around. In fact, it's probably not even that great in my opinion, but it is damn fun, and it sounds so good to just chunk off heads of enemies as you run through zones. I will say though that the Spore Bloom shot does feel weird because it's a hit scan weapon, and when enemies get close to you, you think that the bullets would just body shot them even if your reticle is just past them slightly, but no, it misses. And I mean, it makes sense, it's hit scan. It just feels really weird to use that close range because the reticle is so tiny, but maybe that's just me. So this is the Invader Spore Bloom build. It's really fun and I really enjoy it because the gameplay just works with it. It's elusive, it's fast, it does pack a punch, it cruises through zones, even bossing isn't terrible with it. And I will say that's what makes a build feel good in my opinion. Like, anyone can take anything and clear a boss, but I feel like builds should also be able to cruise through zones as well as deal with bosses efficiently. You shouldn't have to swap a bunch of gear to deal with ad clears and running through areas and then swap back for bossing. That's not fun in my opinion, but Invader is fun, and that's a fact. Anyway, that's going to be it for me. Thank you all for watching. Sorry about my relatively negative attitude lately. I've just been trying to find something fun and useful in Remnant 2 besides crit stacking, but to no avail, and it's kind of getting to me. But yeah, thanks again, and thank you to my Patreon members. I really appreciate y'all. If anyone wants to talk shop about Remnant or gaming in general, feel free to join my Discord in the description below. But yeah, peace and good luck out there, hunters.